Okay. All right, well, welcome, everyone. It's good to have you, good to see you. Welcome to everyone joining us at home from the warmth and comfort of your living room. I assume there are no games being streamed at the exact same time on another device while you're doing this, but I guess that's okay too. So it is good to have you, and I just want you to know, I say a version of this every time we do this. I really believe in what we're doing here. And what we're doing here is theology, and the reason why theology is so important and central to the life of a local church is because Ephesians 4:11 and 12 tells pastors and elders to equip the saints for the work of ministry. And that's really what this is. What we're doing here is really designed to be a launch pad for ministry. It's designed to equip and train and help and do whatever that I can do to help you see the world through different lenses and to make you more effective in reaching Muslims. And again, theology, I've got a definition of theology. Theology is never, ever to sacrifice the depth. There's always this bifurcation of theology isn't really practical. You need to give people practical stuff, but theology is more like, you study that in seminary, but that just belongs in another forum. But it's not true. Theology, biblically speaking, is to take the most lofty, exalted thoughts about God and connect them to the everyday issues in the trenches of life. So we don't sacrifice the depth at all. We work as hard as we can to be as deep as we possibly can, and yet we just go the extra mile, do the extra work of connecting it to the everyday issues in the trenches of life. In other words, we want to show you that theology is inherently practical and life-changing. And before I pray, let me just say this. Again, what we're doing here is we're continuing our Theology Seminar series on cults and false religions called The Gods Who Did Not Make the Heavens. And where that comes from is from Jeremiah chapter 10. We're in this scathing, infernal expose of false gods. Jeremiah goes through this litany of accusations against the futility of false gods and the stupidity of those who worship them. And he gets to this pinnacle, the punchline of his tirade in chapter 10, verse 11, where he says, "The gods who did not make the heavens and the earth shall disappear from under these heavens." And again, it has more punch when you see it in its context, but the point is that one day all the false gods, all the pretenders to God's throne, all of the false religious systems of the world will be exposed exactly for what they are, because God is going to intervene in history in such a way to show that, to put his supremacy on open display. And he will do that most clearly and finally when Jesus Christ comes to establish his kingdom. So we have seen Catholicism, we have talked about Mormonism, and now we get to the towering giant and the seemingly unshakable kingdom of Islam. So let me pray, and then we'll dive in. Oh Lord, I'm grateful for this time. Oh Lord, there's a certain weight and sort of trepidation about talking about this, Lord. This feels so weighty. This feels so massive. This has such a gravity to it, Lord. And I'm not sure entirely why that is. Maybe because this feels like the last major nut to crack in the Great Commission. Oh Lord, that the 1040 window is largely filled up with Muslim peoples who are hostile and resistant to the gospel. And Lord, we were in the exact same place. We are no different or better than them. And Lord, we did not get saved because of our ingenuity or our intellect or insight or anything in us, but simply because of sovereign grace awakening us from spiritual death. And so, Lord, as we do this, as we talk about this, as we discuss Islam, and as we dig down into the depths of what they actually, truly, really believe, and as we discuss what the Quran says about jihad and about Isa and about Allah, and what Muslims actually teach, Lord, I pray that you would warm our hearts with compassion, that you would cause our hearts to burn with zeal and urgency for the Great Commission. And I pray that out of this, the fruit of this would be many, many opportunities with the gospel, for the gospel with Muslims in this area, of which there are many. So we look forward to this, and we just pray that you would use this always and only for the glory of your Son. It's in his name we pray. Amen. Well, there are some statistics that I want you to be aware of in thinking about Muslims. In missiological language and circles, there's lots of different ways to categorize unreached people groups. And again, different groups describe unreached people groups different ways. They use different language for this. So if you're really into missiology and you use different language, don't be offended by if I use a language different than yours. But here's some statistics for you to be aware of. In the world today, there are approximately 6,405 ethno-linguistic people groups that are considered unreached. 6,405 ethno-linguistic people groups that are considered unreached. That is 3,076,658,000 people who are in the category of unreached. And unreached, according to some circles, define that as less than 2% Christian. So if you're 2% or less, you're considered an unreached people group. Believe it or not, Japan is considered the most unreached people group. I don't know how you work all that out. But so a country like Japan or Pakistan or Afghanistan or name the country, that's not hard to throw a dart on a map and find an unreached people group. I don't know, probably, but I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't have a list in front of me, but that's a good question. But here's the thing. Of those roughly 6,400 unreached people groups, there are approximately 3,100 groups that are considered unengaged. So there's unreached and unengaged. And unengaged is defined as no evangelical mission or effort to reach them currently underway. So that means there's no churches, no Bible, no Christians. That's what unengaged means. So unreached means there is some kind of witness there. Unengaged means there is no witness there. And most of the people groups in this unreached, unengaged people groups are Muslim. They're Muslim. What that means is that's nearly 2 billion people on the planet who are Muslim. That's 27% of the world's population being Muslim, or more accurately, 1.9 billion, 1.9 to what's the diff? So that's 1.9 billion people, and the fastest growing religion on the planet, who as a whole are the most violent and resistant to the gospel. And they will all, every single one of them, perish forever unless they get rescued by sovereign grace through the proclamation of the gospel, exactly the same place that we were in before we got saved. And here's the thing, what complicates reaching Muslims even further is that Islam has within it a built-in apologetic against Christianity. Islam has a built-in apologetic against Christianity. What I mean is, Islam is designed from the inside out to deliberately oppose Christianity and keep people from believing in the true God and embracing Jesus Christ. It's just filled with firewall after firewall after firewall after firewall that feels deliberately designed to prevent people from embracing the true God. So, for instance, let me give you a few things. There are 3 things in the Quran that give you an instant verdict of eternal hell. So if you want to be guilty of eternal judgment and face the wrath of Allah, there are 3 things the Quran says will bring you to that place. Number 1, believe that God is a Trinity. Surah 4, 171. By the way, the Quran, I'll say this later on as well, the Quran is divided up into surahs or chapters. So that's Arabic surah. Okay, so when I say surah, I'm saying chapter. Roughly equivalent to chapter. Surah 4, 171, Surah 5, 72 through 74 describe, actually threaten eternal judgment for those who would believe that God is a Trinity. Okay, so that's the first thing. Number 2, to get you an instant sentence of eternal hell from Allah, you would believe that Jesus Christ is God. So if you affirm the deity of Christ, you are for that reason, in the terms of the Quran, guilty of eternal hell. Surah 5:72, we'll look at these texts later, say that very thing. And then the third thing that gets you an instant verdict of eternal hell is to leave and forsake Islam for another faith, in particular Christianity. So there's lots of text about, beware of leaving, and especially being led astray by the Ahl il-Kitab, the people of the book. People like, that's us. So that's really interesting to me, because forsaking Islam and believing that Jesus Christ is God and believing that God is a Trinity are the very things that we are calling Muslims to do. And yet they just happen to be the very things that the Quran says will get you an instant verdict of eternal hell. So we have our work cut out for us in really profoundly unbelievable ways, don't we? I mean, this is an incredible thing. The very things that we are calling them to do, there are firewalls within Islam that prevent them to do that very thing. It's a massive collision here. And so the point is, reaching Muslims with the gospel are going to call many of our comrades to lose their lives. And many have lost their lives in reaching Muslims. It has never not been bloody. There have never not been martyrs in the history of the church's advances to reach Muslims. And yet, why would that stop us? Why would that stop us? Love compels us to love even at our own risk, doesn't it? Because what matches Muhammad for King Jesus? What matches the mythical Allah for the triune God? What matches the Quran for the word of life? What matches the hopeless message of Islam for the hope-filled message of the gospel? So the answers are obvious and the choice is clear. So tonight my aim, what I want to do here is I want to equip you to love Muslims affectionately and to reach Muslims effectively. To love them affectionately and to reach them effectively. And I want to give you courage and compassion to reach blind, dead, damned, and helpless souls, just as we ourselves were before Christ saved us. And so tonight's going to be broken up into 4 parts, 4 if we do our time well, if I use the time well. But number 1, I want to look at a brief history of Islam and how it emerged onto the scene of history. Number 2, I'm going to look at the basics of Islam and what it means to actually be a Muslim. Number 3, I'm going to look at the 7 deadly doctrines of Islam and what Islam actually teaches from the Quran. And then number 4, I'm going to give a methodology for how to engage Muslims with the gospel. What questions do you ask? What things do you say? So let's begin with part 1, a brief history of Islam and how it emerged onto the scene of history. So I really think that before examining Islam and its doctrines in particular, we have to back way up and discuss, okay, well, how did Islam enter into the scene of history? And believe it or not, the ancient roots of Islam actually begin in Genesis 16, what Yevi taught on this morning in the Genesis class. Now, Islam didn't begin in Genesis 16, but the factors that laid the groundwork that would eventually become Islam began in chapter 16. So the scenario, Genesis 16, God chose Abraham and promised him that he would be a great nation and that all the nations of the earth would be blessed through him, right? The problem with this is that Abram and Sarai, they came up with this really ingenious plan because, what was the problem with Abraham and Sarah? Okay, you're going to have a son. That sounds good, but what was the problem? She was barren, and they were old. So they were past the age of bearing children. She has incurable fertility issues. Well, do the math. I mean, they're not having a kid, right? This is just never going to happen. So a great idea is hatched. What's the idea? Hagar. Yeah. Yevi, tell us about this thing with Hagar here. What was the plan?
That she would become Abram's second wife.
Yeah. So, okay. And then in the hopes of that she would have a child, in particular a son. And what would they do with this son that they hope would be born? He would be Abram's heir. So they rigged it up and they had the rendezvous and she conceived and a son was born and God said no. No, that was not the plan. It was not what I said. Categorically not what I said. You and Sarah, not you and Hagar. You don't sleep with the maid. You don't need to help me out. So, but the issue is that she became pregnant, had the baby. The baby's name was Ishmael. God, of course, loved Ishmael, but rejected him as the chosen one, right? Rejected Ishmael. And
rejected him from the book of life, or rejected him from just being the seed bearer?
Yeah, rejected him from having the line through which his plan would unfold. Yeah, exactly. Ishmael would become the father of a great and vast people, and even would be blessed by God, so there's language of that too, but he would just not be the chosen people, the people that God had chosen to carry out his plan of salvation. So Ishmael would be the, and then this is complicated, but Ishmael would be the father of Arabic and Arabic-speaking people. So everyone in the Muslim world claims Ishmael as their descendant. Now, whether that's true or not, I think there is justification for that. Regardless, that's how the story goes. But notice what God predicts about Ishmael and his future descendants. This is a really interesting verse about what God predicts about him, Ishmael and his descendants. It says, chapter 16, verse 12, "And he shall be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and the hand of everyone will be against him, and he will dwell to the east of his brothers." Well, okay, that's some poetic language. That's kind of interesting. What's going on there? The very least that means is conflict. The very least that means is tension. The very least that means is some kind of war. Ishmael and his future descendants would be at war against everyone, and everyone would be at war against him. And so I actually believe that the unrelenting war and tension in the Middle East is rooted in biblical history, in a foolish, impulsive decision made by Abram and Sarai. And so not only that, but the turbulent relationship of Ishmael's descendants with the rest of the world was preordained and predicted by God himself. So I think you could look to Genesis 16 and see, well, there's ultimately where the little seed was planted, which eventually would become the Muslim world. Now, fast forward to 570 AD, 570 AD in Mecca, today's Saudi Arabia. 570 AD, we think, there's a question mark there, Muhammad was born. And putting the pieces of Muhammad's life together are really complicated because the sources from which we gather his life story were 200 years after when he supposedly lived. So it's really hard. It's like, I mean, there's all sorts of like fairy tale, mythological, legend kind of stuff mixed in. So it's really hard to get a clear picture of who he was, although there are some things that do seem clear. But here's a rough outline of his life. So the religious life in Saudi Arabia at the time was pagan and filled with idolatry. That's according to Muslim sources. 570 AD, question mark, Muhammad is born, and it's reported that his father and mother died at an early age. So at the age of 8, he goes and is raised by his uncle Abu Talib. Abu Talib was a trader, not a traitor, but a trader. He would trade things, and he would travel around in these caravans doing trading and buying and selling, and he would take Muhammad with him. And people believe that it's on these trips that Muhammad gained his first exposure to Judaism and Christianity. Now, however, when I say Christianity, there needs to be an asterisk, a footnote by that. And the footnote is that the kind of Christianity to which Muhammad was exposed is not really biblical Christianity. It was Catholicism and a perverted form of Christianity called Nestorianism. That's actually what he was exposed to. So he was exposed to perversions of Christianity, and his subsequent later ridicule and refutations of Christianity were actually refutations of perversions of Christianity. So I actually don't believe that Muhammad at all understood clearly what the gospel was ever. I don't think he understood really what the Bible actually teaches. So he was exposed to perversion of Christianity. And yet it's in these early years of living with his aunt and uncle that as a teenager he seemed to have these disturbing and terrifying visions and experiences. His first mystical experience that he had was of a vision. He was in the desert, which that's all there is there is desert, but he was doing something, and then these two guys chased him down, and they held him down, and they took a knife, and they cut open his chest and opened it up and took out his heart and cleaned up the heart, and then put it back in his chest, sealed it up, and he came to, and he told his aunt, and he said, well, one of them was the angel Gabriel, and he said that the interpretation given to him was that he had been set apart by Allah for a sacred task. So that was the first sort of vision experience. And Muhammad records, his life story is filled with these fanciful tales of terrifying angelic visitations and conversations with people from the spirit world and beings from the dead. And there's actually, believe it or not, a lot of parallels to Joseph Smith here. Actually, many, many parallels. The visit from Gabriel, which is exactly what Joseph Smith's testimony was, conversations with spirits of the dead, restoring the ancient truth which had been lost in a sea of perversion. That was his mission, to restore the truth from Allah. It's exactly what Joseph Smith's mission was to restore the truth which had been perverted and lost. I mean, it's exactly the same. I think there's some parallels here, and I think evidence of its satanic source. And the visions that Muhammad had would provoke intense fear and even put him in trances, and he would be in sort of these trances, and then he would come to, and he would talk about conversations that he'd had with people from the spirit world. And so Muhammad's own description of his experiences had all the trappings of demon possession, to be totally honest. These hadiths, these are not on the level of the Quran. They are recorded sayings of Muhammad by his followers, and he has some of the accounts and descriptions of these weird, creepy, bizarre angelic experiences in here. And again, these are called the hadith. And the hadith records that several times Muhammad tried to kill himself after having these visions, only to be stopped by Gabriel himself. At the age of 25, Muhammad is a grown man now, and he marries a wealthy 40-year-old widow named Khadija. And she was eventually able to persuade him that these visitations and experiences that he had were actually from God. He didn't actually know. He wasn't sure if they were from Satan or if they were from God himself. And the traditional account of Islam maintains that God revealed his will to Muhammad in a series of visions over 20 years, and these series of visions eventually became the Quran. And again, the Quran, I'll say more about this later, but the Quran is held to be the definitive revelation from Allah that supersedes all other revelation, including especially the Old and New Testament. And so, but again, in his lifetime, there wasn't a compiled Quran. That didn't happen until after he had died. More on that in a little bit. But Muhammad goes public with his message. So he begins to preach and have this ministry, and it did not go well. It was not a successful ministry at all. Again, the sources at the time tell us that Saudi Arabia was very pagan, very immoral, and he came bringing a message of absolute oneness of God. There's not only one God, he is absolute being. I mean, he had this absolute authoritative God, and there are no other gods, and that was not a well-received message. In fact, I don't have time to talk about it now, but there is really clear evidence that because his ministry was so successful at first, that he actually compromised and actually for a while began preaching multiple deities in order to win a crowd. And that those verses, they're actually known as the satanic verses, and that they changed them later on. They removed them from the Quran, or at least they changed their interpretation of those verses. Actually, to believe it or not, they're in Surah 55, verses 18 and 19, I think, where he actually commends the worship of these other deities. So that was to sort of win people over. Then he went back to a pure message of the oneness of God. But so here's what happened. In 622, Muhammad flees from Mecca to a place called Medina. And in Medina, so again, ministry in Mecca did not go well. That was not a success. So he flees to Medina, and he establishes there a political military state. So you guys have heard about Sharia. So Sharia means law. So Sharia law just means law. And really what it is that you are establishing the rules of the city or the town or the village, whatever, by the text of the Quran. That's what that is. Sharia law is that you base it on the Quran. So that's what he did. So Medina really serves as a model for all subsequent Muslims, like, okay, well, that was the ideal. That's what you do. That's what you go for in, when you, that's what the expectation of Muslims is, that all cities would be under the law of the Quran. And well-documented ancient sources, even from people in his own day, chronicle years of theft and raiding and murder and bloodshed by Muhammad and his band of followers. I mean, there's no dispute about this. It's not even just like, well, it's Christians who have a bone to pick with Muslims, and so they make up these stories. No, non-Christian sources have stories of just slaughter of the Armenians, just slaughtering people. It was just absolute bloodshed. In 630 AD, Muhammad returns to Mecca with a group of 10,000 warriors, so they're 10,000 strong, and I mean, really, what they are is they're just a bunch of pirates. I mean, there's nothing really sacred about this, and they destroy the idols. They take over leadership of the city, and they establish an Islamic state there in Mecca. 2 years later, 632, Muhammad dies, leaving behind a somewhat unified political and spiritual kingdom. And most of it was accomplished by violent and brutal and bloody military conquest. No joke. Listen to one church historian. He said this. He said, from the outset, Islam was a faith that was spread by the sword. Inspired by an exalted religious ardor, the Arabic Muslim armies under Muhammad's successors, the caliphs, embarked on military campaign to extend their conquest outside of Arabia. Within 100 years, they had created a huge Islamic empire, get this, stretching from India to Spain. They took over everything. Everything. So here's some of their conquests. 635, Muslims take over Damascus, which was the major city in Syria. 637, Jerusalem is conquered. 638, Syria, Antioch, and Caesarea are conquered, so they're taking over cities. In 639, all of Syria comes under Islamic rule. 639, they conquered Persia, modern-day Iran. 640, they invaded and subjugated Egypt. Egypt, they just took it over. In 647, they took all control of all of North Africa. 651, they took control of Turkey. Turkey's huge. They took control. 718, they conquered Spain. And many places in France, they just took over. They owned it. It was theirs. And so the Muslim invasion and expansion of the 7th and 8th centuries was the fastest and maybe even the bloodiest in human history. It's just gruesome stuff. And so today, Islam reigns in the world with nearly 2 billion followers, with 32 countries in the world that have 90% or plus of their population professing Islam. This is really big. This is the world in which we live. And so Islam is a towering giant, but it must fall, and it will fall through the passionate and compassionate and persistent proclamation of the gospel. Any questions on that part, on a brief history of Islam? Oh, yeah, that's a good question. The question is for the people at home. At what time did the Sunni, Shia, and then there's another group in there too, did that divide happen? That's a good question, Teague. I'm pretty sure that was around the 8th or 9th centuries, but I don't know. I gotta look that up. That's a great question. I can tell you the difference between them, but I think it was 8th or 9th century, something like that. So this is pretty early on in their history, because it all came down to really the fundamental starting point division between them is all determining, okay, from whom is the authority of Muhammad passed down? And sort of like the Pope, is it through the Apostle Peter, or is it, some other way? And so one group believes that, it had to be within the line of Muhammad, I believe, and the other group believed that it could be anyone outside of Muhammad. And so there's debate about that. Yeah. Yeah, he had, don't quote me on the number, I think it was around 30 wives, including a 9-year-old girl. Yeah, so, yeah, he was an immoral man. And, they have ways of justifying the wives. And there was a guy on my college campus, Aladdin, and he sold Egyptian food. The food was exceptional. And this dude, you could never get a word in edgewise. And so I asked him it's like, well, tell me about Muhammad's wives. I'd stop there and I'd get in these conversations with him. And I said, how many wives did Muhammad have? He had 30. Okay, whatever it was. And I said, and why is that okay? And the justification was that he took them in order to take care of them. They were alone, they were by themselves, they couldn't take care of themselves. So as an act of kindness, he brought them in so he could provide for them. And I said, what about the 9-year-old? I don't remember what his answer was, though, but anyway, it's pretty, he's an immoral guy. It's like Joseph Smith. Again, the parallels are really uncanny. Any other questions?
Smith is the Islam in U.S.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, all right, part 2, the basics of Islam. The basics of Islam, what it means to be a Muslim. Does anyone know what the name Islam means? What does Islam mean? Submission. It means submission. So to be a Muslim means that you are one who submits to the will of Allah. And in Islam, there are 6 articles of faith. These define what a Muslim is. This is kind of the basics, the 101 of Islam. In Islam, sort of like if you stopped any Muslim on the street and you said, okay, tell me what it means to be a Muslim. Like tell me what's important to you about what you believe. They would give you these 6 things. And these are called the 6 articles of faith. Number 1 is belief in one God. Belief in one God. Now here's the thing about their theology about one God, is there's this really important concept in Islam called the Tawhid. So Tawhid. I might have messed up the H and the W there. No, that's right. So Tawhid, and that refers to the absolute oneness of Allah, which sounds okay, right? But it has the idea that he's solitary, unified, untouchable, so transcendent that he can't be known kind of oneness. And so embedded within Islam, in Tawhid, is the impossibility of Allah having what the Quran calls partners or co-laborers. In other words, the very concept of Tawhid is designed to rule out the possibility of the Trinity. So it's the absolute oneness and solitary oneness of Allah. He is distant and detached and unreachable by humans. Number 2 is belief in angels. So apparently that's a big deal in Islam. You need to believe in angels, what are called jinn or malaika. You must believe in the prophets of Allah. This is a really big deal for Muslims. And so they'll say things like, well, I'll say this. So they believe everyone from Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and those are all prophets, finally culminating in Muhammad himself. And they say, well, we honor Jesus more than you do. So they really take we honor him as a prophet, and so they really feel like they esteem Christ. As a Muslim, you must believe in the holy books. First and foremost, obviously the Quran. However, there is a lip service allegiance also paid to the Torah, the Old Testament, and the Injil, which the Gospel, the Gospels. The issue, though, is that Muslims assert that the original teachings of the Bible have been lost or corrupted. So, when we break out our Bibles and we read verses to them, they're sort of kind of like have this nonchalant shrug of the shoulders. Well, I don't even care about that because that's been corrupted anyway kind of attitude. So Muslims believe that the Quran is God's final revelation revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. It had been perfectly reserved. Now, there is an inconsistency in that belief, so their disregard for the Bible and their feelings of disdain for it are actually inconsistent with the Quran, what the Quran itself says about the Bible. So I'll say more about that later. It's actually a gaping hole and an opportunity for the gospel for us. And then finally, the Quran, Torah, Injil, and then the Hadith would be sort of maybe 4th on the list. But there's probably higher than the Bible as far as importance for them. Number 5, as a Muslim, you believe in the day of judgment. Everyone is going to stand before Allah. And then number 6, you must believe in the divine decree, which is that nothing happens except by the will of Allah. And again, that's not the same as the sovereignty of God. This is more fatalistic. So the thing that sometimes people accuse people who believe in God's sovereignty of, like that, oh, sovereignty is just fatalism. No. Islam is fatalistic. Islam is that. That's not the Bible. So, you'll hear Muslims say, inshallah. Basically it's like, well, hey, if I blow your brains out, inshallah, that was the will of Allah. Sorry. What can you do? So it's real fatalistic.
What was 5?
5 was belief in the day of judgment. Okay, so those are the 6 articles of faith, and I'm going fast, I know that. The next thing are the 5 pillars of faith. So there's the 6 articles of faith and then the 5 pillars of faith. So the 6 articles are what you believe as a Muslim. The 5 pillars of faith are what you do as a Muslim. These are what you do. These are the deeds of a Muslim. So number 1 is you must, to become a Muslim, and you do this every day as a Muslim, is you recite the Shahada, which is the Muslim confession of faith. So, La ilaha illa la Muhammad Rasul Allah. There is no God except Muhammad. There is no God except Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. So that's like basic standard. That really defines who they are. It's interesting, like if you look at the Saudi Arabian flag, there's Arabic writing, and then there's a sword on top. Guess what the writing in Arabic says? La ilaha illa Muhammad Rasul Allah. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. It says that on the flag, Saudi Arabian flag, with a sword over the top. Just going to leave that there. Another pillar of faith in Islam is the Salah. You must pray 5 times a day, praying towards Mecca each time. Number 3, you must participate in zakah, which is giving charitable gifts of money to the poor. Number 4 is sa'um, which is fasting during Ramadan. And do you guys know what, is that a hand or are you just stretching? Okay, thank you. I need to be better at that. Okay, anyone know what Ramadan is? What is Ramadan? What is Ramadan celebrating?
A big rock?
It's not celebrating a big rock, no. No? Yeah, it's 40 days of fasting during the day. Sun goes down, then it's party up. It's celebrating allegedly when Allah first received the initial verses of the Quran to Muhammad. So when he initially revealed himself to Muhammad, then that's what that's celebrating. And then number 5 is the Hajj, a pilgrimage, a holy trip to Mecca, which they're not currently allowed to do during this strange climate. Yeah?
So you were saying Salah or Salah, which is when they have to pray 5 times a day. Is that similar to the word in Psalm whenever they end like a certain psalm, they say Salah, to the next stanza?
No. Good question, because the word salah in Arabic is prayer. Selah in Arabic, they're not, or in Hebrew, in the Psalms, they're not really sure what that means. It could mean 1 or 2 different things. So it's a different word. That's great question though. Great question. Okay, so those are the basic deeds, the pillars of faith of a Muslim: Shahada, the Salah, the Zakah, the Sa'um, the Hajj. Also, just kind of facts, tidbits. A mosque or masjid or jamer is a place of Islamic worship. It's funny. We had this is really really interesting experience. I had some guys in Spokane that I was working with, guys who were interested in being pastors, and I would do this thing once a month. I would take these guys and I would take them on field trips, occasionally to a Mormon service, or just do different things. I just wanted to train these guys to, and have them engage with different worldviews. One time I had a Buddhist monk, like an actual literal Buddhist monk from Tibet, who was sent to the West by the Dalai Lama himself, and I was able to get a hold of this guy, and he met with us, and we were able to meet with him, and not to affirm what he says, but just as a way for, okay, let's hear from the horse's mouth. So anyway, we had the local imam of Spokane come and speak to these guys, and he was extremely rude and super condescending, and it was one of those moments like, just hold me back guys. It was just so rude. But he said he had this whole thing of, is, he basically called everybody racist for saying that they worship at a mosque, because he says the word was a Spanish perversion that basically said it's mocking Islam by saying we're going to crush you like a mosquito, which is not true. I don't even know why I'm telling you this. Kind of still makes me mad to think about it. So anyway, if you ever hear that, well, mosque, if you hear a Muslim say, well, that's it's actually not related to the word mosquito at all. If you trace the etymology, it's not connected at all. Mosque is connected to the French and to the Latin, and it actually means something, I think, prayer or to bow the knee or something like that. So anyway, mosque, jamer, or masjid are all fine. I do have a word about. Snap, here we go. Teague, 656 is when the split happened. 656, so really early on. So it was the 7th century when the split happened. It had to do with the third caliph, and there was debate about whether he could be the caliph. So Islam split into two opposing parties. Yeah.
I know this may be like a case-by-case basis thing, but since Ramadan and Eid al-Fitr is like celebrating the giving of the Quran, would you maybe like caution Christians against attending if they're invited to an Eid al-Fitr celebration?
That's a really good question. Yeah, so his question for the folks at home, Teague is asking, would you caution Christians against going to, like when they break their fast and they hang out at night? No, I don't.
Or like at the end when they have the big Eid al-Fitr feast?
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I think it would depend on what you were expected to do there. But I would say if they're going to invite you into their world, take it. Take it. Spend time with them, right? I mean, that's a real honor that they would invite, especially if they knowingly that you're a Christian. You probably wouldn't get invited, but maybe in other countries, I don't know. I don't know how that would work.
I've frequently been invited. Like,
Oh, have you? Oh.
Not the nighttime thing, but at the end when they have a big feast, the Eid al-Fitr.
Oh, I see. That's great. Well, I would say, man, if that can be a platform for a further relationship later on, go for it. Go for it. You know what I mean? As long as you're not forced to say that Allah is the true God or something, or something. It's like I wouldn't be comfortable with that, but do it. Go. Okay. Word about jihad. There's debate about this, right? There are debates about what the word jihad means. What's the debate? Jihad, according to Islamic scholars, means this or this. What are the two thises? It either means what? A struggle, but against what or who? Was that? Okay, so there is a struggle. There is a struggle, a battle against infidels, against unbelievers. There's one view. The other view is internal struggle, like a spiritual struggle, right? So that's a debate today. And the question is, which is it? Which group is right? How are we to understand jihad? And it's not super easy to answer, but I really don't think you have to look hard or long at the Quran to see that jihad has less to do with individual internal spiritual struggle and really does have more to do with war against the enemies of Allah. Now, let me before I read verses to you that are just really, frankly, horrifying and terrifying, let me say this. Most Muslims in America, how should I put this? Back in Spokane, I haven't made any Muslim friends down here yet, to my great sadness. But in Spokane, I had conversations with Muslims about this, and they were very sweet and kind, and had me into their home, and very hospitable, and we had them in our home, and it was really an amicable relationship, and really enjoyable, and really stirring conversations, and so although most Muslims will not put a sword to your neck. They just won't do that. Most Muslims will not disagree with the verses that I'm going to read to you. That's just a fact. I mean, so I had a friend, really sweet guy, Ahmed, and I said, Ahmed, what happens to Christians according to the Quran at the end? What happens to them? And he didn't want to answer. I said, what happens to Jews? And he lied to me. I don't know. I don't really know. Yeah, you do know. You do know. I didn't say that, but I'm like, you do know. It's not good. So, most Muslims are, very peaceable and sweet. But that's not to say that the system of Islam is, because it's not. So here's some Quranic text on violence. All right, Surah chapter 2, or Surah 2, verses 190 through 193. Fight in the cause of Allah, those who fight you, but do not commit aggression. God does not love the aggressors, and kill them wherever you overtake them, and expel them for where they had expelled you. Oppression is more serious than murder. So I think he's what he's saying. And again, the Quran is really hard to understand. Most Muslims don't even understand what it is, and it's really kind of, I mean, it's even like seemingly contradictory in the same verse. But what he's saying is, if you are oppressed, that's more serious than murder. You should overtake them and kill them. So if you're oppressed at all, you murder them. But do not fight them at the sacred mosque unless they fight you there. If they fight you, then kill them. Such is the retribution of the disbelievers. But if they cease, then God is forgiving and merciful, and fight them until there is no oppression and worship becomes devoted to Allah alone. So Muslims believe that, this passage is just referring to defensive war, and I suppose you could see that here in this text. But the historical context, however, the passage is not defensive warfare, since Muhammad and his followers had just relocated to Medina, and they were taking over the place. And in that context, it was, well, if anyone challenges you, then off with their heads. But here's some more. Surah 3, 151. Soon, this is Allah speaking, soon we shall cast terror into the hearts of the unbelievers, for they that join companions with Allah, for which he had sent no authority. So here's what that language means. So those that join companions with Allah, it's really weird language. And you hear that, it's like, what's that even talking about? Well, that is talking about, that is a sort of a backhanded slap in the face about Trinitarians. You join companions with Allah. You join companions. You say that there are others with him who assist him, and they've got all sorts of language that we would never use. But that is talking about people who, Trinitarians, and Allah says, we will cast terror into their hearts. Okay, here's more. Surah 4:74. Let those who fight in the way of Allah, who sell the life of this world for the other, whoso fights in the way of Allah, be he slain or be he victorious, on him we shall bestow a vast reward. Surah 5:33. The punishment of those who wage war against Allah and his messenger and to strive to make mischief in the land is only this, that they should be murdered or crucified, or their hands and feet should be cut off on opposite sides, or they should be imprisoned. This shall be a disgrace for them in this world, and in the hereafter they shall receive a grievous chastisement. Surah 8, 12 through 17, the most terrifying of all. I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieve. Who disbelieve. Unbelievers, non-Muslims. Therefore, strike off their heads, cut off every one of their fingertips. This is because they acted adversely to Allah and his apostle. And whoever acts adversely to Allah and his apostle, then surely Allah is severe in requiting evil. This, taste it and know that for the unbelievers is the chastisement of fire. Believers, when you encounter the infidels on the march, do not turn your backs to them in flight. If anyone on that day turns his back on them except for tactical reasons or to join another battalion, he shall incur the wrath of Allah, and hell shall be on his home, an evil fate. But it was not you who killed them, it was Allah who killed them. And it was not you who launched when you launched, it was Allah who launched, and that he may bestow upon the believers an excellent reward. Allah is hearing and knowing. So last one. And I have like 7 more. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Surah 9:5. Kill those who join other gods with Allah whenever you find them, and seize them, besiege them, and lie in wait for them with every kind of ambush. But if they shall convert and observe prayer and pay the obligatory alms, then let them go their way. And more about fight those who do not believe in Allah, especially those, the people of the book. That's us. Wage war against the infidels, those who are your neighbors. Strive against, here's another one. Okay, I guess I'm not done. Surah 25:52, it says, strive against unbelievers with utmost strenuousness. That word strive has within it the Arabic root, jihad. Strive against people, it says. Jihad is the word. This is not a personal sanctification context. It is a violence context. Strike at their necks. Surah 47, cut their heads off, bind them. And again, 66:9, strive against the disbelievers and the hypocrites, be stern with them. Hell will be their home. Again, strive against them. Again, is the word jihad. And so, I mean, I think to me, it's a total no-brainer. I think it's totally obvious. In the Quran, it advocates the murder of unbelievers, murder of who they would describe as unbelievers, which would be us and Jews and anyone else. Now, again, that's not to say that Muslims in the DFW area would ever personally take up a sword. I don't think they're gonna. I mean, you never know, right? I mean, anyone could be crazy, but but the reality is that is, I believe, that those who take the militant view of Islam, I believe that's the right view. I believe they're interpreting the Quran correctly. And someone at this point might raise the objection, well, yeah, but what about the conquest? What about the book of Joshua when God says kill entire people groups? So what do you do with that? Well, the difference between that text and the text of the Quran is that there are historical restraints. I mean, this, at the very least, this should be said. There are historical restraints in the book of Joshua that would limit that to a particular time in a particular region to particular people groups at a particular time and place under a particular situation for particular people who were the one who were to do the execution, namely the Jews. It was a very limited. It was very time in geographically specific. Okay, does that make sense? There's constraints there. None of those constraints are in the Quran, not one. It's open-ended. They're open-ended context. There's no clarification of like, well, okay, only under these circumstances. It's not there. It's just open-ended. So there's not a historical context restraint in the surrounding context. So the scope of violence in the Quran has no clear limits. It's really up for grabs. And so I think it's fair to wonder whether any non-Muslims in the world are immune from being attacked. And we see it. I mean, and if anyone wants to fight about that, it's like, well, then just read Voice of the Martyrs. I grow weary of getting these every single month and seeing kids with hacked off limbs from Muslim invaders. It's like, stop! I'm growing weary of this, and people with their faces burned off and from Muslim invaders. And it's like, and yet, I believe there is justification in the Quran for doing those very kinds of things. So I hesitated bringing any of that up here because the last thing I want to engender is hostility or hatred or bitterness toward Muslims, and it's the opposite, right? Because what's the difference between them and us? It's just sovereign grace, right? Had we the opportunity, we would have burned people's faces too. Just if you question that, we grossly misunderstand how wicked the human heart is, and so we are no different or better. And so what I want this to do is to engender compassion, for us to look upon them as those who are like Christ, looking upon with compassion upon the crowd. So Islam claims to be a religion of peace, but only Christians know the Sar Shalom, the Prince of Peace. Okay, so that is the basics of Islam. That's the finish of part 2. Any questions on that? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. They're how they view, so what their version of missions. There are guys who come. It's kind of this. I can't speak for everything that they do with regard to advancing the cause of Islam. It's largely in the form of sending imams to a particular area. And sorry, I don't know. Ask me your question one more time. Yeah. Yeah, mostly, I believe. Mostly, if I understand right. I feel like I'm missing something, some other tactic that they had. To be totally honest, though, the way that they really continue to grow and spread is that they just have a bunch of kids. So that's the big way that Islam spreads, and by subjugation, by the sword, taking over villages and people groups, but there are some more peaceful, I think, kind of attempts, but they don't really do outdoor evangelism like we would do. It's very different. Yeah.
What I'm finding out and learning about the
Yeah.
Is that true of this as well?
100%. 100%. Now the not well, I would in many cases most do not really know, or even in some cases care what Islam really teaches. There are some Muslim scholars, but even some of the imams in particular places, they don't actually know the Quran well either. They're placed in leadership positions and they really don't know much either. So yeah, that's very common that even Muslims will not know or read the Quran at all and be familiar with what it actually teaches. Yeah, really, really common. Yeah.
So would you say that it's more cultural instead of like an actual religious practice in a way for some of them? Because like they just know that that's what their religion does, and so they just kind of partake in it instead of actually, believing in it in a way.
I mean, that does exist, and that is widespread. It's hard because it is so culturally bound up with everything that they do in their communities, and so, but for many, it is just kind of cultural, and yet it has such a force and a weight about it that you just can't really get away from it. So yeah, but there are those within the culture who are the purists, who are the zealots, who are the ones who do take it seriously. The Muslims that I interacted with back in Spokane, I think especially on the college campus, which was really interesting. There was like 400 students from Saudi Arabia who were at this campus. It was really interesting. I mean, it was just a haven of Islamic outreach. Really hard, really challenging. But out of all the ones we talked to, there was only a couple who really took it serious, and the rest just didn't care. And and they'd get drunk and they'd party like any other American, and so it's I have seen the real zealous ones do exist, but in many places it is cultural. Yeah.
Yeah, because like with the call to worship for them, the 5 times a day, do they even really know what they're praying most of the time, or do they even actually do they do personal prayer, or is it just they repetitively repeat the same thing for the 5 prayers?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's hard to paint all with one brush, because again, there are some people who are very devout and know what they're doing. But it's interesting that there are, this doesn't exactly answer your question, but it will give some idea. In countries that are largely Muslim, but they don't speak Arabic, the Quran is still in Arabic, and all of the things performed in the mosque are still in Arabic, even though they don't speak Arabic or know Arabic. But they're still required to do all of it, just like the Catholics were doing the thing in Latin. It's kind of the same thing, and so they don't really know what it is, and they don't really know what the Quran says. They are just Muslim. You're a Muslim, and so that is extremely common. That it's kind of a going through the motions. Again, there are some who are zealous and devout and who know their stuff and who I guess love what they believe, but yeah, it's not super common. Yeah.
Just like in the scriptures, does Quran have more like stories? But I think my brother-in-law, he would tell me that there's like mentions of Jonah or mentions of other things, and it's just like one verse or something.
Yeah.
That's the way he would reach people. Like he's like, hey, do you want to know the full story of Jonah?
Oh yes. Yeah, that's a great question. Vlad's question is, in the Quran, are there a mix of biblical history narratives, and yeah, they're really convoluted, and they're only portions of biblical narratives like Adam and Eve and stuff with Abraham and maybe a couple other things, and so there isn't.
Chronological either, right?
No, the Quran is not chronological at all. So it's all kind of this scattered mix of stuff. And so, yeah, I think that would be a really good way to engage Muslims. In fact, I'll say something like that at the end, where it's like, well, hey, that's interesting that the Quran talks about Adam and Eve. Can we look at the Torah? Can we look at Genesis 3 and see the whole scene? I think that would be really effective. So I think something like that. Yeah, good question.
Where's the origins of their faith? It's the same thing as ours. Adam and Eve, God created the world in 6 days or 7 days, and the rest on 7. And is there Eden and then Abraham and Noah? Everything is still considered history?
Yeah. So Vlad's question is, the origins of their faith, does it have the same starting point as us? Is there a literal 6-day creation? Are there Adam and Eve? Are there, Noah and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob? And yeah, all those names, I believe, occur in the Quran. and there is a rudimentary knowledge of those things. Like there is a really basic affirmation and understanding of those things, and again, those they're not repeated, in full in the Quran. So there are just little snippets of those things in the Quran. So they would affirm those things too. They change the narrative though. They would say that God did not choose Abraham, but chose Ishmael, and Ishmael was the chosen one. And they even reverse, Genesis 22. No. What is it? Anyway, whatever it is that, So they would say in Genesis 22, when Isaac is, about to be killed, they would say that it was actually Ishmael. So they switch it. They change the narrative. Yeah. And Jordan, back to your question too, I just thought of this. I should have said, it's not that there aren't well-intentioned, well-meaning Muslims, because they do exist. But again, it is largely cultural and... I just wanted to add that there are well-intentioned, well-meaning ones who actually do care about it. It's not like it's only, cultural, but
Every religion, right? Like every religion has their rules about people who believe what their religion practices.
Yeah.
And there's other ones who are kind of like, oh, we just do it because, our families have done it. for
100%.
years, and so we're a part of it. And
100%.
They're just like what you said in college. There's out partying, maybe drinking and stuff. So
Yeah, and that's exactly. So that's a good comment. So Jordan's comment was, it seems like in Islam, like in any other, faith, there is a spectrum of people who it just kind of cultural to them. It doesn't really matter. But then there's other people who, they really care and passionate about it. Yeah, so that's true too. The difference is that it is so culturally bound, especially to Middle Eastern culture, that it winds up having. I think progressing more easily into something that is just mostly cultural, and so it's all right. Well, part 3 here. We'll do a few things, then we'll take a break. So I'm gonna have to fly on this, but part 3, let's talk about the deadly doctrines of Islam. The deadly doctrines of Islam. So I want to give a summary of the major doctrines of Islam. More could be chosen, of course, but I think these are the ones that most intersect with the most central doctrines of the Christian faith. And so I think you need to be most familiar with these to engage Muslims with the gospel. You don't have to really memorize all this stuff, but you should at least have an idea of what they believe. So the first one is, number 1, the exclusivity of Islam. The exclusivity of Islam. American Muslims will tell you that Islam, is, I mean, they'll word it carefully, but you will sometimes get the party line of, oh, well, you know what, anything is fine, whatever you want to believe is good, and Islam is another option. But that's not actually what they probably believe. There was a thing, it was really interesting, in Spokane, there was the Islamic Center put on a presentation of Islam to the community. So I grabbed some college students and we went. It's like, we got to go to this, and we're going to ask questions. And my wife went too, and she asked some real zingers. It was really a sweet, really interesting thing. But they started off by talking about, it was actually, they talked out of both sides of their mouth. The leaders of the mosque said, basically they had sort of this soft, mushy, pluralistic, well, whatever you want is fine, and this is what we believe, and they made it sound like it was sort of like, oh, whatever. But then actually they did talk about that this is the one true faith, and no one caught it. It was really interesting. So they still slipped in, this is the only way, and you should know that. But then it was largely sort of swallowed up and drenched in, well, hey, whatever you want, and that's good for you. And so I had a very spirited conversation with one of the leaders afterwards, but that's for another time. But Islam shares in common with every other cult and false religion exclusive rights to the truth. So here's a few verses from the Quran, Surah 3, 18 and 19. The only true faith in Allah's sight is Islam. He that denies God's revelations should know that swift will be Allah's reckoning. There you go. Surah 3, 85. He that chooses a religion other than Islam, it will not be accepted of him, and in the world to come he will be one of the lost. There you go. Up the ante here. Surah 4, verse 56. Those who reject our revelations, people like me, we will scorch them in a fire. Every time their skins are cooked, we will replace them with other skins so that they will experience the suffering. Allah is most powerful, most wise. Surah 517 calls Christians unbelievers. It's kind of interesting. So in the mind of Muslims, you are unbelievers. You are not believers. You are not one of them. You're not, oh, we share like a common kind of bond. They don't actually believe. American Muslims will tell you that you do, but they don't actually believe that. Or if they do, they're wrong because the Quran says something different. Surah 541 says that Jews are people who will listen to any lie. So the Quran is very anti-Semitic. It's pretty scary. The Quran says that Allah does not wish to cleanse the hearts of the Jews. That's a quote. Allah does not wish to cleanse their hearts. Quote. Surah 572 calls Christians blasphemers and unbelievers. It's interesting. And other verses I could give you too. It says, Ahad al-Kitab, the people of the book, that's us. So anytime that phrase, Ahad al-Kitab, Kitab means book, people of the book, that's referring to Christians and Jews. It says that we are polytheists and we will be in hellfire. That's the Quran, just so you know. Okay, doctrine number 2, the doctrine of Allah, the doctrine of God. And Allah literally means what?
God.
Yeah, God means the God, the God. So it's not his personal name, it's just the God. And it's true that Christians and Muslims are monotheistic. The truth of the matter is that Muslims are Unitarians because they reject the Trinity. And it's also true that some of the same attributes used in the Quran to describe Allah are also used in the Bible to describe Yahweh. There's this really, famous list of the 99 names of Allah in the Quran. Look, he's most gracious, and that's really a sort of a bragging thing for them. They really are proud of this list. Not on the list is love. I think that's interesting. But so, although there are some similarities between Allah and the God of the Bible, just do not be fooled. We're not talking about the same thing. I know there's debate about this. I am 100% persuaded, would take a bullet for it, that the God of Islam is not the God of the Bible. We're not talking about the same thing. Allah is not the God of the Father, is not God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit, who collaborated in eternity past to save hell-deserving sinners from every nation. That's not at all anything even close to Islamic thought. This is just foreign and offensive. Rather, the God of Islam is unknowable, unreachable, unpredictable, incomprehensible, and impersonal to the point that he cannot actually be known. A relationship with God, the kind of thing we talk about, access to God, is like, that's considered insulting to Allah. The incarnation is extremely offensive. That would just never happen. I spent time with Muslims, and it's like God would never come in the form of a human. That's preposterous. They just never. That's just unthinkable. Hold on one second. And so Allah is just so entirely separate and divorced from his creation. And again, that gets into Tawhid. He's so divorced from creation that talk of a relationship with Allah would be to compromise his transcendence. So Allah is calculated and brooding and hard to please and unpredictable and unapproachable and from my perspective, malicious and bloodthirsty. The reason why I say that is because even if you do everything he tells you to do, well, he just might decide to send you to hell anyway, because that's just the way it goes. Inshallah. Yeah. That make you forget?
No, I don't want to sort of abruptly screw this up, but Ishmael had Jacob and Esau essentially in their thinking?
Sorry, which question?
Well, lineage.
Oh, yeah,
So,
I don't know.
They have Moses, they have Jesus as their prophet. Okay, Ishmael is their, their line.
Mm-hmm.
But why do they have to go into Isaac's line?
So Vlad's question is about their lineage and how they do the genealogies and Ishmael. And I don't know the answer to that question. That's a really good question. I don't know. That's probably something I need to sharpen up on. Yeah, Tommy.
It's interesting how
Good question.
apologetics and polemics are both hard
Yeah.
It's not a separate thing. It's
Yeah.
like within the body of the faith itself
Yes.
is all this anti-everybody else.
Yes. 100%. It's interesting, right? It's really challenging, and so I think the real challenge with reaching Muslims is, I mean, how do you share the gospel with someone who they've been taught their entire life that if you believe what Christians believe, and also there are clear verses in the Quran that say, do not make friends with us. That's in the Quran. Don't be friends with them. Don't do that. It's in the Quran. What do you do with that? I mean, the whole thing is just hardwired from the inside out, right? To deflect and accuse and to be anti everybody. Yeah, I mean, it's really a tricky thing, man. That's crazy. Yeah.
I find it interesting that they're anti-Semitic, but yet they acknowledge that Jesus was a prophet.
Yeah. They would say he was a Muslim. So they say that Jesus and the apostles were Muslim. Yeah, so they rewrite a lot of history to make it work for them. Yeah, crazy stuff. All right, so the Trinity, doctrine number 3, the Trinity, which it goes without saying. I mean, you know it already. They deny the Trinity, right? They just flat out deny it. And not only do they deny it, they condemn to eternal punishment those who believe it.
What was 2?
I don't know. What was the doctrine of God, Allah? Yeah. So listen to these verses condemning belief in the Trinity. And there's a little nuance to this that you'll hear as we go. But Surah 4, 171, O followers of the book. Who are they? Who is it talking to? Us. Do not exceed limits in your religion. Warning. And do not speak lies against Allah, but speak the truth. Okay, which is the Messiah, Isa, the son of Maryam, Jesus, the son of Mary, is only an apostle of Allah. Believe, therefore, in Allah and his apostles, and do not say il thalutha. Do not say Trinity. Do not say Trinity. So that's what that's saying. Desist. It would be better for you. Warning. Allah is only one God, far be it from his glory that he would have a son. Well, there you have it. There you have it. Absolutely incompatible, right? Again, Trinity, that word Trinity here is literally the three. Do not say il taluth. Do not say the three. And again, notice to do so, it said, was to exceed limits in your religion. That's overstepping your bounds. That's going too far. And the next verse said it's to speak lies against Allah. And so again, I think this solves the debate for us, whether Muslims and Christians worship the same God. They most categorically do not worship the same God. Surah 5, 73, speaking about the Trinity, they do blaspheme who say, now it's elevated to blasphemy. Okay, first it was just exceeding limits, now it's blasphemy. They blaspheme who say, and listen to their wording, Allah is one of three in a trinity. For there is no God except one, Allah. And if they do not refrain from what they say, a painful torment will befall those who disbelieve. Okay, so let's unpack that and do exposition on the Quran here. So to affirm the Trinity is counted as blasphemy. Okay, that's the clear Quranic perspective. Those who believe in the Trinity are viewed by the Quran as unbelievers. Okay, a painful torment awaits those who affirm the Trinity, just so you know. And that's really interesting. We'll get into the language of. Well, I'll just get into it now. Notice, Allah is one of three in a Trinity. Again, that's what I mean when I say that the Quran is really confusing. Not even Muslims understand the Quran. The Arabic is it's pretty jumbled. It just doesn't really compute. And you'll hear them say, oh, the Arabic is so beautiful. I mean, Arabic is a beautiful sounding language, but the Quran is largely impossible to follow. Allah is one of three in a Trinity. What does that mean? Do not say Allah is one of three in a Trinity. I think what they are saying that we say is that Allah is one of three gods. That's actually what they think we believe. When they say, do not say Allah is one of three in a Trinity, Three what? Three what? I think they think we mean three gods because it goes on to say, there is no God except one, Allah. So we'll get into this in just a minute, but the Quran doesn't actually know what we believe. This is a huge gaping hole in evangelizing Muslims, and it's a really great opportunity. It's one of those just providential, satanic oversights of the evil one, where it's like, oh, you know what, we've got a gaping hole there, because not one time does the Quran ever actually accurately represent the Trinity. Not one time. So I'll get more into that in a minute. Yeah.
So what did the historians believe?
Oh, I can't remember. It's some kind of wacky, mystical cult group. Do you remember, Tommy, what the historians believe?
There were two different gods. It has to do with two gods or something like that.
Yes, that's what it is. There's like one created the physical matter, and he was like evil. He was like the evil god, and then there was like this good god who created the spirit world. I mean, has some carryover into Gnosticism, and so yeah. So there's a couple different deities. So that's the kind of junk that he was exposed to, and Catholicism. Okay, a few more texts here. Surah 5, 116 and 17. Where did the time go? And Allah will say, O Jesus, son of Mary, did you say to the people, so this is Allah speaking to Jesus, asking him a question. Did you ever say, take me and my mother as gods rather than Allah? Okay, it's interesting. He will say, glory be to you. It is not for me to say what I have no right to. Had I said it, you would have known it. You know what is in my soul, and I do not know what is in your soul. You are the knower of the hidden. I only told them what did me, my mic going out, and that you shall worship God, my Lord and your Lord. And I was witness to them while I was among them. So what we have here is this really interesting non-historical quotation of Christ, where Allah asks, again, it's a fictional kind of exchange here. Allah asks Christ, did you ever say to worship, did you ever tell your followers to worship you and your mother as gods? And then it's sort of like this, like, oh, why would I ever say something so stupid? So do you see what they're doing here? You can tell that the guy who wrote the Quran didn't actually know what? He didn't actually know the Trinity. He didn't actually know what Christians believed. He thought he did. He was under the assumption that he understood Christianity, but he didn't. Because name for me ever in the history of the world someone who was an authentic Christian who said, oh yeah, you are to worship Christ and his mother as gods alongside the Father?
Catholics.
Who has ever said that in the history of the world, right? And his little quip here was Catholics. It's interesting, Vlad. There are theories that because there was such homage paid to Mary and Muhammad was witness to that was the impression that he received, that there was bowing down before statues of Mary. They're worshiping that chick as a god. What is that? So that there could be some legitimacy to that. But again, the reality is that the writer of the Quran, which probably was not Muhammad, again, in fact, I'm almost sure it's not, didn't know what Christians believe, although he was under the impression that he did. So I think this is really interesting. So the Quranic misrepresentation of the Trinity is that, I'll put it this way, not one time does the Quran ever get the Trinity right. It's never Father, Son, and Spirit. That's never described in the Quran as the Trinity. It's always Allah, who Muslims say that we believe in the Quran. In the Quran, they say that we believe that Allah had intercourse with Mary and then had a baby. And that was Jesus. And that he was a God, and that Mary was a God too, and that we worship them. It's like, who are you talking about? We're not speaking the same language here. And so not one time does the Quran get it right. That's a gaping hole. It's a gaping hole. So that tells us the implication is that the Quran, that's the kind of thing that I have said to Muslims, like, look, that right there is proof that is not a divine book. That is a book written by a man, and he got it wrong. That's an error. That's wrong. It's a historical error. Anyway, more I need to say about that. I've got 3 pages on the Trinity. Let me do a couple other things here. before we take a break. Carlito, are there any batteries back there? If you wouldn't mind checking. I think this thing's going out on me. Doctrine number 4 is Christ. I'll just say, a couple things about this. If the Quran denies the Trinity, misrepresent it though it does, which they do get it wrong and misrepresent it and deny it, then you would assume that they disbelieve that Jesus Christ is God, which is they do deny. They categorically deny the deity of Christ. So even though the Quran admits that he was sinless in Surah 3:46, even though the Quran admits that he did miracles, Surah 3 verse 49, nevertheless, it ferociously denies one of the most central doctrines of the Christian faith, namely the deity of Jesus Christ. Surah 3:59 says that Christ was created from the dust, like Adam. So he was a created being, is the Quranic evaluation. Surah 5:17, unbelievers are those who declare God is the Messiah, the Son of Mary. So unbelievers are those who declare that God is the Messiah. It's kind of weird language. I mean, the Bible doesn't really use that language. I mean, I guess technically that's true. God is the Messiah. Yeah, I see what you're saying there. But the Bible doesn't use that exact language, so you can just tell the guy just did not hang around Christians who knew what they were talking about. But we're considered unbelievers if we say that the Messiah is God. Go ahead.
How can they say that he's a prophet, yet not believe the words that he was saying?
Well, so Vlad's question is, how can they affirm Christ as a prophet when they don't believe the words that he says? See, that gets down to, they believe the words that he is quoted as saying in the Quran. They believe historical traditions according to their tradition, and anything in the Bible that would counter that, they would say is corrupted. They would say, well, that's a corrupted message. It's the very same thing that Mormons do. Well, it says that, but that's been corrupted. I mean, it's the trump card for everything. It's like, well, that's been corrupted and contaminated. Okay, and every angle it's designed to counter. Surah 5, 72 through 75, they blaspheme who say God is the Messiah. So this is Surah 5, 72 through 75. They blaspheme who say God is the Messiah, the Son of Mary. Allah will forbid him paradise, and his dwelling will be the fire. So if you believe that Jesus is the Messiah, Jesus is God, you will be forbidden paradise, and your dwelling will be the fire. It's there in the text. And then it goes on to say the Messiah was no more than an apostle. And then what's the other verse here? Surah 19, 88 through 93 just talks about that far be it from Allah that he would beget a son. Just attacking that language. It goes on to say, indeed, those who say that, it is monstrous. At it, the skies are ready to burst, the earth split asunder, and the mountains to fall down into utter ruin. Those who say that Jesus is the Son of God, I mean, they're using this really sort of, what's that exaggerated language called? Hyperbolic language, to express the outrage that you would believe in the deity of Christ. Other texts, Surah 9, verse 30 is another one, and more here. I gotta blow through this. Doctrine number 5, the death of Christ. The death of Christ. And I'll only say this one thing, two things. One, not only do they deny that the death of Christ was a sin-bearing death of infinite value, they also deny what? That it happened at all. They deny that he died at all. No, he didn't happen. Because what's their rationality? What do they say?
God called Jesus' soul up to heaven, and then that Judas was actually the one crucified. Yeah. So for them, it would be unthinkable that Allah would allow one of his prophets to suffer in that way. So at the last minute, there was this bait and switch, and Christ was called up to heaven, and it was Judas, and then I think there's another view out there. There's another guy that they say, Simon of Cyrene, the guy who carried the cross. No, it was him. It was Simon of Cyrene. He was the one that was crucified. And it looked like Christ. It only appeared like it was him. Christians are totally deceived.
And some even go so far as to say that crucifixion, there are books written by Muslim scholars to try to work it out, to deny that crucifixion was even a form of execution in the first century. I don't know how you substantiate that, but that's kind of the angle that they're going. So there are verses that talk about, it's a monstrous falsehood. That's a quote, a monstrous falsehood to say that he would be killed. What makes this really odd is two things. One, there are actually a couple texts in the Quran that say that Christ did die, that he did die. Now, it doesn't say crucifixion, but the text does say that he died. So Surah 355. Allah said, "O Jesus, I am terminating your life and raising you to me." In Arabic, terminating your life is literally, I shall cause you to die. So they've got ways around that. Well, he didn't mean that. I mean, it meant something else. But I mean, it's like, and then Surah 19:33, Christ is quoted as saying, "Peace be upon me the day that I was born, and the day that I die, and the day that I get resurrected alive." So there are actually two verses in the Quran that's like, well, that's not clear. I mean, that's interesting. It seems like there's contradictions there. But again, they have ways of working around that. Most Muslims probably don't know that those verses exist, though, because they don't really read the Quran. So again, I mean, more I could say about that. Let me finish with this, and then we'll do a quick break, and then we'll talk about how to reach them. Doctrine number 6: salvation is by works. How about I do that? I want to talk to you about the history of the Quran. I don't know how to proceed. Anyway, according to the Quran, salvation, if there's no wrath-bearing, sin-bearing death, then that automatically means that you have placed yourself in the category of salvation by works and merit, which is exactly where they're at. It's exactly what this is. However, having said that, though, what makes this tricky is that in Islam, if you read the Quran, you'll find, I mean, it's such a convoluted book that you'll find these sort of tenuous, hazy, fuzzy, foggy, kind of muddy, ambiguous promises of forgiveness. Allah is most merciful. He will forgive you. Okay. Oh, okay. Well, great. Then I'm good to go. Well, not really. So there's these unconfirmed promises of forgiveness. And yet there's this system of works and merit that you're supposed to earn it, and your good deeds outweigh your bad, Surah 23. But then there's also the unpredictable will of Allah, which might just turn the tables on you and pull the rug from under you. So which is it? I mean, is it by grace where he will just forgive you? Or is it by your works? Or is it by the absolute will of Allah? I don't know how you make sense of that. And you know what? Neither do they. They have no idea. They have no idea how to make sense out of that. So you talk to a Muslim, it's like, oh yeah, Allah will just forgive you. Will he? Are you sure? Yeah. Okay, well then tell me, maybe without the snarky tone of voice, but tell me, Surah 23, verses 102 through 104, those whose good deeds weigh heavy in the scales shall triumph, but those whose good deeds are light shall forfeit their souls and abide in hell forever. The fire will scorch their faces and they will writhe in anguish. So you don't actually know until the last day, till your good deeds are stacked up against your bad, and we'll see how it goes. Right? I mean, that's exactly where Muslims are at. And other, so I mean, there's total fear. I mean, there's no guarantee. Actually, no, there is one guarantee, and this is not like a Christian, like warped perversion of what Islam teaches. There is one way to know and have a guarantee that you can go to paradise, which is, what have you heard? Yeah, you die in a jihad. That's true. That's actually true. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 verses that talk about that if you die in a jihad, if you die as a martyr, you're good.
So you can live a futile life and just die as a martyr.
Yeah. I mean, I think they have ways of, working that out. His comment was, you can just live a futile life and then, go out as a martyr and get paradise. I mean, yes, technically speaking, they might have ways of saying, well, no, you have to be a good person, and because most even nominal Muslims are moralistic to a degree, and even though lying is permitted. Anyway, it's kind of a weird.
So martyrdom is always defined as somebody killing you. How about you killing yourself? Is that considered martyrdom still?
I don't know. So his question is, martyrdom is always where you are being killed. In Islam, is it you killing yourself? Does that qualify as a martyrdom? I don't know if the text is that clear.
Is that why people are suicide bombers?
I think it leaves open the possibility that no matter how you die, I'd have to look at the texts again to see if if there's allowances for you killing yourself. I don't know if it says that. I think it's just that if you are killed.
They're very anti-suicide, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. So,
Even if it's like a suicide bombing.
Oh, well, yeah, that's different.
yeah.
A suicide bombing, but
Yeah.
suicide, like killing yourself because you were sick or,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
or were despairing or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's do this. Let's take a 3 minute. I'll give you 3 minutes because I am so kind and generous. 3 minutes, and then we'll come back, finish on the Quran, and then a couple ways to reach Muslims. All right, let's do this.
All right, Troy, bring it back in.
Bring it in.
Yeah.
I got to land the plane in like 5 minutes here. 5 minutes.
Yeah, like that.
Right. Yeah, right. I've got 20 pages on the Quran, so I'm not going to, I don't know what I'm.
I said, I'm going to get through Revelation in one night.
And then when I wound, after that, I just let it go just downhill. It will take 7 sessions to do. That was preposterous. That was so fun, though.
Islam.
I literally think about when I'm going to teach Revelation as just a regular class.
Yeah.
I literally think about it every week. I'm like, oh, should I do it next semester? I can't. I'm doing
I
the.
talk about my equipping class with you.
I know, ownership.
Well, no, post-ownership, spring.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we'll have to see what. Yeah, because there might be a Bible class, like going through a book of the Bible. If we don't have one of those, or the drama of salvation through the Old and New Testament, Old Testament, New Testament survey, doing one of those. That might be, anyway, something to talk about. All right, well, let's do this. Let's finish here. I'll say one thing about a few things about the Quran, and then a few questions about how to reach them. The 4 things about the Quran you need to know. I've progressed to 4 now. 1 now, a couple now, 4. What the Quran is. There are 4 things you need to know about the Quran. 1, what it is, or at least what the Quran claims to be. The Quran itself claims to be, or what it is claimed to be. So faithful Muslims believe the Quran to be the eternal word of Allah, that the Quran is just as eternal as Allah himself, that there has been a perfect heavenly copy always with Allah in heaven. And so really, how should you put this? The Bible is not the equivalent to the Quran. So more like our equivalent to the Quran would be Christ. Like that's how much they like would esteem the book. It's called the eternal word, and so there's a veneration for the Quran. And although there is lip service paid to the Torah in the Injil, the law in the Gospels, really for the Muslims, the Quran is the crown achievement. It's made up of 114 surahs or chapters. It's about 4/5 the size of the New Testament, so it's shorter than the New Testament. And again, the assertion is that it has never been altered or changed in any way at all in any manuscript ever in the history of the world. Not even a diacritical mark. So these little marks here, they would say that not even one of those ever once has been changed ever in any manuscript of the Quran. And so they said there's only been one Quran. It's been the same thing. And they'll say, well, you have all these different manuscripts, and so they've really, which that is not accurate, by the way. So the second thing is the Quran's teaching about itself. The Quran, that's where they get their beliefs from. The Quran says that itself was passed down from Allah through the angel Gabriel. And so it passed directly from heaven, kind of sort of dropping out of the sky kind of thing. That would be their view. That's their view of inspiration, that it just came directly from Allah, not through human agency. The issue, though, however, is number 3, the dubious history of the Quran. The facts just don't match up. So they, although they claim, it's like, well, the Quran has never had any changes or differences at all ever in the history of the world. That's just not true. That's just not true at all. I mean, that's silly because, well, I'll say the version you'll get from Muslims is very conflated and a very sanitized version of how the Quran came into existence. But what they're leaving out is decades of conspiracy, decades of cover-up, decades of just sort of underhanded sort of things. It's really, not to mention undeniable archaeological evidence that calls into question the veracity of the Quran. And so the account is this: after Muhammad died in 632, there were divisions among Muslims as to the official content of the Quran. There was no official text of the Quran at the time of Muhammad's death. And so the Hadith tells stories about that there were scattered verses of the Quran written on camel bones, rocks, palm tree stalks, bathroom stalls, napkins, and that the only authoritative versions were thought to have existed in the minds of particular scholars called the Qurra, and who allegedly had all or parts of the Quran memorized. And so there were these internal battles and disagreements over the actual text of the Quran. So even from Islamic accounts, at the very beginning, there was disagreement as to, well, who has the right version? And again, that's a pretty shaky history. I mean, if you've got parts of tennis balls and camel bones and caves with scattered verses of the Quran, it's like, well, you're going to put that together in a book, and it's going to be something cohesive. I mean, it's just a nightmare of a thing. And so all this internal tribal warfare resulted, and so some of the Qurra, these scholars who had some or all of the Quran supposedly memorized, they were dying in battles, and there were very few left. So what happened was a search was launched by this guy named Abu Bakr, which was Muhammad's right-hand man, to collect the fragments of the Quran and collect them in a book. And so what began then was this very haphazard, disorganized scramble to gather up the bits and crumbs of the Quranic text and combine it together, along with the scholars who had memorized portions of the Quran. And again, this is not like a history, oh, this is what Christians say. No, this is from Islamic sources. You hear that and you're just like, okay. All right, there's no way that you came out with something clean and cohesive, and I believe it's reflected in the incoherence of the Quran itself. I mean, that's why they had to organize it from longest to shortest. That's how it's organized. No, longest to shortest chapters. There's no historical context because you can't put it together. I mean, there's pretty valid theories on what chapters were written in Medina, what were written in Mecca. Based on the content, but I mean, no wonder it's such a really hard thing to figure out. Yeah.
When you say the Quran, do you mean by the sayings of Muhammad, or what? Like when they're trying to put bits and pieces together of the Quran, no Quran existed before, so that means they were just putting bits and pieces of the sayings of Muhammad?
Yeah. So Vlad's question is, so since no version of the Quran existed before, are you saying that what they did was they just pieced together the bits and pieces of the sayings of Muhammad? No, what I'm saying is, almost, but what I'm saying is they compiled bits and pieces of what Muhammad claimed came from Allah. So the sayings of Muhammad are these. So to get nitpicky with you, these are the collected sayings of Muhammad. What was revealed by Allah through the angel Gabriel is this. That didn't actually happen, but that's what this is. So there is this stuff just scattered everywhere, and they're kind of trying to cobble it together. And there are stories in the Hadith of like missing verses, and that one guy was like, oh, actually, you know what? I just realized there was a verse missing. Here it is. And they would like insert it just before it hit the press kind of thing. Story of a goat eating pages out of the Quran and verses missing, and like, I don't know. We don't know where it is. And then, oh, you know what? I found it. Did you get it out of his poop? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's just like there's these out of the goat's poop. Poop. I said poop 3 times now. Okay, there it is. It's a win. That's a win for everybody. So this thing is a total mess here. Fast forward 18 years later to 650 AD when a man named Uthman, this is very important, Uthman set out to make a standardized, revised, finalized version of the Quran, which sounds noble and expected, but listen to how this came into being. Again, Muslims were divided on the text of the Quran. They were divided on this. There was no agreement. Several competing alternative versions of the Quran were in existence in the various Islamic centers of the Middle East. And Uthman sent a message to this dude named Hafsa, who had a copy of the Quran. Why he chose that copy, I'm not sure. Send that to me. I'm going to invite some scholars. We're going to make copies of this, and we're going to send those copies to the major Islamic centers of the Middle East. Okay, noble project, I suppose. The other part of the letter was burn the existing copies that you have, destroy them, which is exactly what they did. And so they did. So they shredded and burned and vacuumed up all the existing copies and redistributed copies of the revised, standard, authorized, King Muhammad version of the Quran. And so there's a guy named Al-Kindi who wrote the first eyewitness testimony of the compilation of the Quran. He wrote it. He was an eyewitness at the time, and you can read what he said. And I mean, it's there on the page. And then another one by a guy named Sahih al-Bukhari, who also wrote an account of this. So it's not like Christians like just making this up, like, oh yeah, well, Christians just, Muslims did this. It's like, no, I mean, Islamic sources show the process, and it was like, that is shady. Super shady. Most Muslims either don't know this or they will tell you that they don't, pretend like they don't. But most Muslims don't know this, and most people in the world don't know this about the Quran. And again, there's nothing like this in Christianity where it's like, we'll burn the alternative versions. That just does not exist in our history. Right? There were people who tried to burn the Bible because they didn't like it, but there was no sort of covert, oh, well, let's burn these manuscripts because that doesn't match up with the other ones. It's like Christians have always been perfectly honest about, oh yeah, we have lots of manuscripts and there are variants and mistakes in those manuscripts, but there's a science called textual criticism in which we can find what the original text is. And we have honest additions that give manuscript evidence at the bottom to show what those manuscripts are so that you can research those on your own, because we have nothing to hide, because the text is so good that we can determine what that is. So that probably didn't make any sense. So here's what resulted. Uthman's efforts did produce a cleaner, more stabilized text. That's true. However, that came at the cost of burning those other versions and mainstreaming this one version and burning the rest. Now, here's the deal. There are and have been discoveries of Quranic pre-Uthmanic manuscripts that are different than this. But they exist. There's this one called the Sa'ana manuscript, the Sa'ana. And so I read this book for a book review, and because I was like, oh, you know what? This book describes in Yemen these Sa'ana palimpsest. Do you know what a palimpsest is? It's a manuscript where there was original script. They washed it, cleaned it off, and then wrote a new text on top of it. But through the really simple use of infrared, you can actually see both texts, the below and the above. So what this was, and there are multiple of these, is that it were two alternative copies of the Quran in the same manuscript. It's incredible. Two different versions in the same, man, this is just, what a way to go. I mean, this is really helpful. Half this thing is in Arabic, but what they do is show the changes and differences between them with red markings. So, and this is an Islamic scholar. I mean, I don't know how faithful she would be considered. I think she's received some flack from the Muslim community for that. So just so you know, there's also the Cairo manuscript, the Bonham manuscript, the Fogg palimpsest, the Sa'ana, and there's something else. There's a bunch out there that are some of them pre-Uthmanic texts that are different from what we have today. So if anyone tells you nothing has ever been changed ever in the history of the world in any manuscript of the Quran, it's not true. It's a lie. That's just not true.
That's something the Mormons claim too, right?
That's exactly, yeah, right, exactly. It's that same kind of thing. So that's just a gross misrepresentation. So let me do this. Here is why. Let me finish with this, and then you can ask a few questions. Here is why I believe we need to reject Islam. All right, here's why. If someone asks, like, okay, well, how do you know that Christianity is true? How do you know that Christianity is false? The reason why I do not believe Islam, here are several reasons. Islam is internally inconsistent. Islam is internally inconsistent. In other words, its own sources don't even match up. There's conflating, contradictory information within Islam. Like the whole thing about salvation, it doesn't make sense. It's contradictory. The thing about Christ dying, he didn't die, but he did die. and it's internally inconsistent with itself. There's no cohesive system. It just doesn't add up. It doesn't match up. Okay, other things you could say too. It is inherently unclear. Again, that's a bit subjective, but I mean, I'm not the first one who said that. I mean, everyone knows who has spent time. I mean, you try reading the Quran, it is not a page turner. I mean, I know that's offensive and that could get me beheaded in some countries. It is super boring. And because there's just no cohesiveness to it. It's just like, okay, now what's going on? And so it's very muddy, fuzzy, vague, ambiguous. It's inherently unclear. You can't write a systematic theology of the Quran. You can't. You could do it with the Bible. There's billions of them out there. You can't do that with the Quran because it's so like, there's no system to it because it is also internally inconsistent. Number 3, it is historically unverifiable. I don't know if I spelled that right. Okay. Something looks funny about it, but maybe it's just I'm up front. It's historically unverifiable. And in fact, there's a lot of things about it that, not a lot, there are some things about it that just don't match up with history, but it makes these assertions, and there's things in the Quran, and we have no guarantee that the life of Muhammad, which there's a lot of weight that you have to put on Muhammad to make this thing work, and we just don't know. I mean, it's just unverifiable about his life. I mean, it's possible the dude never even existed. Probably did. Maybe he didn't. I don't know. I mean, if the nearest sources to his life are 200 years after he lived, it's like, I don't know. That's not super reliable. So there are a lot of things that are just historically unverifiable. And again, the Quran is not rooted in actual history. I mean, it's just historically detached from anything that you could put a pin in. Next, it is intertextually irreconcilable. That also doesn't feel like I spelled that right. No, I didn't. What I mean by intertextually irreconcilable is that although it claims to be in harmony with the Bible, it contradicts the Bible in like every single possible way. Like I think it's Surah 568. Surah 568, I think it's Surah 568, that says that you should read the Torah in the Injil as a way to judge the claims of Muhammad. And the idea is that if you read the Torah in the Injil and you read this, then you'll see that they harmonize in every possible way. But they don't. They are intextually irreconcilable, completely different messages. Like for instance, there's not one mention anywhere in the Quran of animal sacrifices for sin. Not one. Where do they go? Where do they go? There's no concept of atonement. It's completely gone, right? So it doesn't reconcile with the Bible in any way. Although, and here's the thing, although it claims to do so. That's huge. Next, it is textually suspicious. Textually suspicious. These points definitely need more work. I jotted these down last night at like 11 o'clock, so they kind of, those kind of moments when things just come to you. It's like, oh, I'm going to write this down. So this is kind of winging this here. But textually suspicious, and what I mean is the Quran of the text, the text of the Quran is just so messy and so suspicious and so unreliable. It's like, look, there is a really checkered past with this book. They claim it is flawless and sent down from Allah himself. It's not. It's not. It has all the marks of, this is a mess. This is a mess. So it's textually suspicious. And every indication about the textual history of the Quran indicates that it has been changed and altered, and it is a real mess here. And then finally, I reject Islam because it is morally untenable. It is morally untenable. Again, these aren't the only reasons. These are just some reasons that I kind of thought of. Morally untenable. But the ultimate reason is because my authority are the scriptures, right? The scriptures have a message, and that is true. And the Bible passes every single one of these tests. And I think that, to me, what's what gives this power. The Bible is internally consistent with itself. It is inherently clear. I mean, yeah, no one knows what baptism for the dead means, but like everything else in the Bible is clear. Right? The Bible is historically verifiable. The Bible is, maybe a different category, the Bible is not textually suspicious. It is textually, I mean, we have every reason in the manuscript history to affirm and believe the Bible. But morally untenable, by that I mean that the Bible's description of women, that they are half the value of a man, I reject that. I reject that. Not because, oh, that's not fair to women. It's because women are created in the image of God. They're equal with men. The Quran does not affirm that. You are half the value, women, in Quranic thought. Let me see. Surah 2, I think in the 200s, talks about if your wife or wives disobey, beat them and send them to bed. Well, my wife could probably beat me up. So that's not going to work. No, I mean, I'm joking. That's not even funny. But I could totally take her in a wrestling match.
We all believe it.
Yeah. So there are things like that. Also, the way they speak about Christians and Jews and just malice, bloodthirsty kind of stuff. I mean, there's morals in the Quran that everyone reads that and goes, no, that's... it's interesting, though, that being Muslim, they get a pass. Like, we get all the flack for the Bible's teaching on homosexuality. They get a pass, I think, because they're people of color. So white Christians are the ones who are going to take the hit on homosexuality and things like that, but Muslims will get the pass. That's okay. We're going to be martyrs anyway. But so anyway, these are several reasons why I just, you know what? It's like, I think these kinds of reasons I look at, and it's like the Bible passes every single one of these tests. The Quran fails every single one of them. And I think these are good conversation topics for when people say, well, Muslims, they believe what they believe with just as much passion as you. They think it's the only way. You say yours is the only way. Well, how do you contend with that? These things. I think these are the things that you look at and go, look, there's so much about everything about Islam just doesn't work. Okay, well, I wanted to talk about, I'll say this, one thing about how to reach Muslims, and then I'll close. The win that you have with the Quran is that the Quran, even though most Muslims will say the Bible's been corrupted, the Quran nowhere says that. In fact, the Quran says the opposite of that. The Quran says that Muslims should read the Torah in the Injil. Tells them to read the Torah in the Injil. That is an extremely advantageous thing for us in evangelism. You can tell, right? Because you can say, look, even if you don't know the verses in the Quran, you can just say, look, I know the Quran says that you should read the Torah in the Injil for guidance. Can we just open the text? Do you mind just sitting down with me? And since the Quran says that this is a holy book and this too is the word of God, that would you be willing to just sit down and read the text together? And so go to the Gospels and do what Vlad was talking about. Well, look, that's interesting. The flood is talked about. Do you want to read the whole thing with me? Let's talk about that, and let's talk about the unfixable, humanly incurable problem of sin, and then which leads us to a divine Messiah eventually, right? And so get them to the Scriptures, get them to the Bible, get them in your homes, show them hospitality. Middle Easterners should never out-hospitalitize Christians. They should never. We should be the champions on that. And we have every reason for that. And so approach them in public, get to know them, find out where they're from. I mean, they're from incredibly diverse places, and it's super interesting. Most of them have really interesting histories and stories where they came from. I mean, and they're easy to talk to. They're actually really friendly, and it's not hard to at least begin conversations about spiritual things with them, because there is at least, they have an obligation to express interest in that with you. And so they're fairly easy to build relationships with, and so do that. do that. It's a total win. They're here. I mean, there was a Starbucks I was in before the lockdown thing, and I turned around, and then I was the only white dude in the whole Starbucks, and everyone else was wearing a hijab. I loved it. It was incredible. I was like, this is the best. I love this. I love living here, right? Where you can have this. And so approach them, invite them in your home, get to know them, and they might not feel comfortable coming to church on a Sunday morning, invite them anyway, but if any other outside church events, invite them, bring them. And the Christmas thing that we were going to have, bring them to that. And see if they'd be willing to be comfortable in that. So anyway, but open the Bible with them because the scriptures are more powerful than even their objections. Okay? All right, that's it. I more that we could say. Any thoughts or questions?
Could you repeat number 4 of the beginning?
I don't know what number 4 is.
Could you go back to...
We're dismissed. You could.
History, basics of Islam, deadly doctrines of Islam, and then number 4.
Oh, number 4, which I didn't get to. It was a methodology to reach Muslims, which I didn't give you. I have basically I tried to invent a choose-your-own-adventure novel of where to go with Muslims in a conversation. Like ask them this question, and depending on what they say, go to this question or to this question. So I developed like a system that you would work through them in a conversation, and each one of them would take you to the. Remember those choose-your-own-adventure books as a kid? So I came up with one of those for having gospel conversations with Muslims, and each one of them takes them to shows the irreconcilable. Anyway, basically it makes Islam collapse on itself and gets you to the gospel no matter what questions you ask. And so it's not a great system, but it's in process. So
Definition of Injil again?
Gospel.
Gospel.
And then books up here. So I've got books on the Quran, the corruption of the Quran, the hidden origins of Islam. This is real scholarly. I didn't even think some of it's in German. And so there's that kind of stuff. This book, which you can read it if you want. It was not a page turner. Which Quran? So this would deal with the kind of stuff we're talking about. Multiple versions out there. This one here. This is an excellent book. It's doing its best to consolidate and group by category and theme what Muslims believe according to the Quran. So this guy did his best to do like a systematic theology of the Quran. So a Christian did it for Muslims, not really for them. He did it for us so that we can reach Muslims, but this is really good. So if you don't want to plug through the Quran, then you could read this, and that would give you a really great overview. That's a great book. And then 10 Things. Oh, I'm losing it here. I'm fading here. 10 Things You Need to Know About Islam. That's a good book. The Gospel for Muslims by a former Muslim. And so really simple, really introductory, basic level kind of stuff, but really helpful. And then my favorite book on Islam is What Every Christian Needs to Know About the Quran by James White. This is excellent, excellent. You should just get this. It's so good. And a lot of my material comes from this, and it is so worth having. So anyway, these are up here. You can take pictures of them. And other than that, that's it. Thank you, guys.